Hello, everybody. It's your friendly neighborhood book podcast guy, I guess. I don't know where I was going with that. Fuck, I'm still on a Spider-Man high. Welcome back to The Creator's Conscience, and this is not the only time we're welcoming back something from the show, because I've been away for a bit. We're also welcoming back a guest. You might remember Adiba Jaigirdar, who came back on last year to talk about the Henna Wars. Well, guess what? That book has released now in the summer, and last month I broke my ankle, and it was the only thing that kept a smile on my face, so Adiba, welcome back to the show. It's really good to see you.
Thank you for having me back. It's good to be back here again.
Yeah, so how's lockdown been treating you? You learned any new skills or anything, or have you just been writing out new books?
I have been on deadline since April. So lockdown has literally just been working towards all of my deadlines, and I'm still on deadline, so that's basically all I've been doing, just reading and writing.
See, that sounds safe. I probably should have just done that, just worked on editing, but I decided I'm going to take up running, and then I broke my ankle while I was running. So exercise is bad for you guys. Don't do that. Just stay back and read some cool books, like this one, essentially.
I mean, you were trying to be, healthy and get exercise. You had good intentions.
Good intentions, but my water bottle, which fell out of my jacket whilst I was running, did not have good intentions. It's not pretty, breaking your ankle then going to a hospital where most of them are COVID patients.
Yeah, I can't imagine. It's a terrible time for that to happen. I mean, it's always a terrible time to break your ankle, but especially when hospitals are overrun with COVID patients.
Yeah, and I don't drive, so I had to call my aunt to come and drive me to the hospital, which she enjoyed that way too much, honestly. God, I'm 24 and she still treats me like her little nephew.
I think that's just family.
Fair enough. And speaking of family, we'll get right into this. So the Henna Wars just came out 2 months ago, I believe, and I remember my Twitter timeline was full of just Henna Wars images and reviews and everything. I got the chance to read it myself, and I have to say I was both pleasantly surprised and I kind of got the story I was expecting when we first did an interview, and it just brought this huge freaking smile to my face. So how's post-release? How's that been treating you so far? You on a high still?
It's been really good. I mean, I was really overwhelmed by, the response on Twitter, especially because of, the pandemic and how it has, affected the world, specifically affected, the book industry. I wasn't sure how things would go, so I was really happy to see, the response that it got. It just made me, super happy with, the book community, all the friends that, I've made there. And right now, I'm just, like I said, I'm on deadline, so I've been writing a lot. So I haven't actually been focusing that much on the book or how it's been doing. I just want to focus on, writing and having a career and having more books to put out. Even actually when the book came out, I was on deadline for my next book, and I was promoting the Henna Wars. At the same time, I was revising hardcore. And it was also Ramadan, so I was fasting. I basically did not sleep during a couple of weeks that the book was when the book first came out. It was a very hectic period. So I'm really glad that things have kind of calmed down now, because I really needed that. I needed some sleep.
So I mean, I don't know if this is out in UK bookstores, but I imagine if it is, are you going to do the whole thing where you walk into the bookstore like a fucking rock star and just pick your book up and be like, yeah, this is me. Hello, everybody.
I mean, yeah, definitely. I know that a few Irish indie bookshops have ordered it in. So when I get the chance to actually go there, I would love to do that, and see if I can sign some copies for them. And the same in the UK, when I can obviously come to the UK.
Of course. Because you see, signing the copies of your own book, that is fine. Signing copies of somebody else's book, as we learned from Twitter a few months ago, that is not fine. Such a bizarre concept to me. I remember that came out.
Yeah, it was It was something.
Yeah, I have to admit, I probably just did that so I could get that joke in there, to be honest. But we'll get right into the Henna Wars. I should make this clear in case you've not seen like the title or anything. This is going to be full on spoilers. So if you have not read the Henna Wars, but you still want to hear me and Adiba chat, lucky for you guys, we did another interview last year. I'll put the link to that below. Go check that out. It's really fun. But if you have read the Henna Wars and you want to stick around for some good old spoiler discussion, well, you've come to the right place. We're all ready now. I've got my chamomile tea, and Adiba's got some kind of ice cream thing. Is that the one with peanuts in it?
Yeah, it's an almond magnum.
Oh, I could really go for one of those right now, not gonna lie.
Is it not super warm there right now? This is where I got my ice cream, because I was like, it's like 23 degrees today, and I could not cope with that.
It is freezing in Glasgow right now.
I wish I was in Glasgow.
The other day I went out to deposit some stuff at the bank. It was humid and muggy as hell, reminded me of being back in Dubai. And I was wearing a jacket plus this thing, and I thought, stupid decision. I'm also going out the night. I decided I won't wear a jacket, and it fucking rains. My life is just one big mishap after another, honestly. But first thing I want to get to is with your lead character, Nishat. Now, usually when I've read queer stories, the coming out section is usually like the big climax and the thing we're sort of building to. And I was very surprised to see that this is like the first thing that your main character is dealing with. So was there any like specific decision behind doing that, or was that just something you felt was natural?
So I think the reason why I did that was because I didn't want to write a character who found out her sexuality throughout the course of the novel. I want to write a character who already knew, because I think there are a lot of books out there right now where like a character, especially when it comes to queer women, that they maybe meet a girl and then they're like, oh, I'm maybe attracted to her, and then that's how they realize their sexuality. And I didn't want that to be the case for my character, because I think so many people realize their sexuality and it's not linked to a specific attraction to a specific person. It's just about who they are. And I think it's necessary to have those kinds of books where, it's not about the one person, it's not about the one love story. So, for Nishat, if Flavia wasn't there, it's still necessary that for her that she had come out to her parents. It wasn't linked to Flavia. And I didn't want there to be, like, in a lot of YA books, I think there's, like, this pressure that is, like, oh, like, you have to come out because, like, we're in love or because we're in a relationship. And I didn't want that to be there. And I just didn't want it to be, like, just a coming out story. I didn't want the focus to be on the coming out. I wanted to focus on what happens after that.
Yeah, and that's another point I've got here that's really fun. I always like that kind of stuff, but it seems to me like Nishat, her queerness is kind of used throughout, and it defines her views and everything, but it's not like a huge part of the central conflict. That's like the whole henna business thing. And it was just a really fun way of using that as like setting up a worldview and creating a character who's got a different worldview, but also then having this familiar kind of plot point to it. And I mentioned you walking into a bookstore like a rock star. That is to me what Flavia came off as. I imagine if this was like a movie, Flavia would be the girl coming to school on a motorcycle with a leather jacket. Like when she comes into the book, she's just like so freaking cool. And I guess you feel that because of the way Nishat feels about her. But the other part I do want to mention here, because you've said it a lot in interviews, I love how unapologetically you use the Bengali culture in the beginning of the novel, because, not gonna lie, I don't know much about it, so getting to sort of like learn about that through this like little intro with the weddings and everything, it's really good at making it kind of accessible in an entertaining way, so props to you for doing that, really.
Thank you. I grew up like never seeing, Bengali culture in any books. Not even like YA, even like adult books. There are very few books about Bengali culture, and specifically about Bangladeshi culture. So a lot of the books that are out there are like Bengali Indian. And, culturally we're very similar, but we are two different nationalities, and there are differences. So, I just wanted to write a book like this because I think it's necessary for, Bengali kids nowadays to be able to see a reflection of themselves. So I'm glad that you could learn something about Bengali culture.
I mean, the way you described those weddings, like, I both wanted to be there and felt like I was there. Like, I've been to a few, like, Indian weddings because I grew up in Dubai and, like, my friends invited me to them and stuff, but there was nothing on the scale of what you were describing in this book.
I'm surprised in Dubai you didn't meet any Bengali people because, like, there are so many Bangladeshis in, like, Dubai, Abu Dhabi. Like, I have, my aunt lives in Abu Dhabi, and my sister-in-law, she used to live in Sharjah.
Oh, yeah,
and
yeah.
she lived in Dubai back in the day as well. So, yeah, like, there's, like, a big Bangladeshi community there.
To be honest, I probably went to a school with a few Bengali people, but I was just an awkward nerd and I didn't have any friends. So.
That's fair. That's a mood.
That's not. It kind of that started more when I got to university because a lot of my fellow students when I went to university in Dubai, they were like from all over the world, and Bengali and Indian, Pakistani, a whole range of them. So all the cultures kind of meshed together in the university I went to. I don't know if you ever heard of the Emirates Academy of Hospitality Management.
I haven't. No.
It's right opposite the Burj Al Arab in Wild Wadi where I used to live.
I've seen it then because I've seen like the Burj Al Arab and everything.
Yeah, it's kind of. I lived in front of that when I grew up in Dubai. Pretty amazing for the fireworks at New Year and stuff.
I can imagine that's quite central, isn't it?
Somewhat, yes. It's just central enough, but also it's kind of its own little area. But yeah, my university they love to like celebrate other cultures during like Ramadan nights and Eid and everything like that. So. It's something that I grew up vaguely familiar with, but not to the extent like someone who's obviously from that culture would know. So reading this kind of both made me homesick and made me learn more stuff. Yeah, I miss where I grew up, man, honestly.
I really like Dubai, Abu Dhabi. Like I've been there a couple of times just because my family are from there, and it's really interesting because obviously it's like a Muslim country, and I love seeing that because I think like Dubai, Abu Dhabi, they really embrace like their Muslim culture in a way that like maybe some other countries don't. I do really love visiting there.
Yeah, I would love visiting there as well if the flights were a little less expensive.
Yeah,
those Emirates flights. God. But we'll get on to some of the other stuff here. So Flavia, instantly really cool, and I believe we talked about this in your original interview. Like, you were probably vague about it to avoid spoilers, but your book does have an antagonist, and my God, do I have some words about this character. Oh my. See, because I grew up in Dubai, we did grow up around a bunch of different cultures and everything, but there was also girls like this who sort of thrived on gossip and being the center of attention, and you know what, this is going to be very metaphorical, had an ego like fine china. So that's very fitting that the character's name is China. But even though I remember we talked about Kamala Khan and stuff as well when we first show up. The scene where Flavia is going to, not Flavia, sorry, Nishat's going to this party that China's invited her to, and then gets essentially like thrown out and like ostracized because of how different she is. That reminded me a lot of a scene that I read in the first volume of Kamala Khan, Miss Marvel, where she gets excluded from a street party for a very similar reason. So I take it that's quite common amongst Bengali people in Western communities as well.
I think not just Bengali people. It's like it's a common experience for like people of color, and I think like it depends, right? Because it's about how well you like fit into like Western ideals. So like if you manage to like mold yourself into like this idea of what they want, what like Western ideals want you to be, then you fit in. But if you don't, then you don't. So I think a lot of POC have these kinds of experiences.
Yeah, definitely. And experience is kind of the key word there, because still on YA Twitter and all the book Twitter nonsense, there's always this like misunderstanding between what queer experiences are for different people, and especially for like women of color and everything. That's something that you did very confidently in this book. I feel like when Nishat comes out to her parents, they don't take it greatly at first, but they sort of learn to accept it as the story goes on. And that's something that I can see instantly being like, oh, you don't have immediately supportive parents. I can see some random blogger or something being like, oh, this book is instantly unrelatable and is harmful to these people and shit, which I think is complete nonsense. Like, I read different stories from queer people because I love to see how the queer experience differs amongst people. So was this something that if you're comfortable talking about this at all, is that something that like happened to you as you were coming out, or is it like someone you've known who's like that?
That's a good question. No, like it's not. I guess I'm not speaking specifically to like my coming out experience or like my friends' coming out experiences, but I feel like for a lot of brown people, this is how parents react to anything. Um, like if you say something to them that makes them uncomfortable, that they don't want to deal with, this is just how they react. So like even though it's not about my specific coming out experience, it is like my experience, my lived experience of how like Bengali parents deal with these things. And from speaking to other readers, like I've realized it's just like a common experience for a lot of POC.
And I love seeing that, because I think part of you is like, I think part of us kind of wants the parents to accept it and for everything to be a big happy story, but the reality of it is it's not always going to happen. But that doesn't mean that instantly there's some kind of barrier between them. Like, I love that the family in this book still loved each other in their own way despite that happening, and the arc they have was more about them learning to accept it and open up a little, and it goes little by little, like how I imagine it would be in real life, but it's still like, it's like a light at the end of the tunnel, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm. And I think what a lot of people have to realize is that in a lot of cultures, we just have a very different relationship to queerness. Um, like in South Asian cultures, before colonization, we did have like a history of queerness, you know? And then when the British colonists came, they wrote into the law like all of these anti-queer laws. And that's where a lot of the homophobia in our culture comes from, you know? And we're still very much dictated by these ideas. And this is true in most like post-colonial countries. We all have like histories of queerness that were essentially wiped out by colonization. And I think like a lot of people, they try to judge like our stories by this Western standard. And they think like, you know, these cultures, or the people from these cultures, they're like backwards, they are like really homophobic, etc. And it's true, like a lot of these cultures, they are like deeply homophobic, and the homophobia is like ingrained into our culture, our faiths. But the reason for that is like our history, and like, you know, people from that culture, they're going to need like different contexts. They're going to need a different way to approach queerness, and that's okay, because you know, we're not all Western. We come to queerness from different places. And I think it's important for like white and Western readers to be aware of that as they read like queer books by people of color.
Yeah, and that's probably the best answer I could have asked for, to be honest. Like I've only recently started studying like colonialism independently, but that's something that I didn't even know. So as we're on the spoiler review, I'm fucking learning stuff after the book as well. That is, yeah, I'm definitely going to look into that more. Probably when I reread the book as well, I'll probably be looking at it through that context also. And we'll get into the sort of Western stuff, because like you, this family lives in Ireland, and I spoke to you about you know, movies like Bend It Like Beckham and Blinded by the Light, which I had a feeling this book was going to have a similar vibe to, and it really does. That's probably the part where I mean, like, I got the story I expected, because I don't know if this was a movie, like if I'm pitching it like that, I don't imagine it being like a sort of Love Simon, very mainstream, it hits all points kind of thing. It feels a lot more like that British indie coming of age story where there's a little bit more grey areas, and whilst it's still fun, it's like a different style of humor, a different style of filmmaking and everything. And that director who did Bend It Like Beckham, I would imagine her being a great fit for this. Like, if it ever, I mean, I don't know if you can talk about movie deals or anything, but if that can happen.
If there was something to share, I wish I could share it.
But particularly the Irish setting, the principal character I thought was hilarious. I don't know if have you seen the show Dairy Girls?
I haven't yet, no.
No, it's very funny, and like I was literally imagining like one of the casts from that show playing the principal character. And if you haven't seen that show, it's hilarious. Deals a lot with also like Irish and English fighting and that sort of thing. But from there, Nisha, despite having friends, like, still to me felt very, like, introverted and quiet and kind of like she was suffering in silence with a lot of these secrets she didn't want to know. And as someone who's grown up reading, like, superhero comics, that's a trope that I'm very fond of. Like, someone who's dealing with something that they can't really share. I don't know, I'm not saying, like, she's a superhero or anything, but it's a very similar kind of vibe. So that's probably why
that's
I can...
That's going to be the sequel where Nishat turns out to be a superhero.
Hook it out. Get her to cross over with Kamala Khan and like join the Avengers and everything. That'd be great. But something I loved here was... Nishat wasn't like the typical protagonist in which I see like they're ostracized from their school completely and like have no friends. Nishat still had friends. But she still kind of felt like the outsider and the underdog, so that helped me keep rooting for her. And we can get into what the story really is about, this rival henna business thing. And I know, I imagine henna's a big part of your life. We talked about like why you use that, but the thing I really want to get into, I was not expecting this book to discuss so heavily the idea of cultural appropriation to the level that it did. And that's a topic that is very touchy a lot when people bring it up. Like, there's so many people that have different ideas of what it means. And like a lot of things, this book, I feel, made it very accessible, and I felt like I was learning a lot about it whilst also enjoying the story. So if that was your intended effect, basically what I'm saying is bravo.
Thank you. That was my that was my intention. It was my intention that we could have like a conversation about cultural appropriation. Not just like this book says this about cultural appropriation, so this is the truth, but just that, you know, I think cultural appropriation is like a conversation that we're just kind of getting started on, and I do think it differs like between different cultures. It can obviously get very complicated depending on, you know, what culture you're talking about. Henna, for example, is not just, you know, Bengali culture, it's South Asian culture, it's part of lots of Arab cultures, it's parts of lots of African cultures. So, you know, it's a complicated discussion, and that's okay, you know, like, and I hope that this book can be like a start of that conversation.
Yeah, because it was anything but simple the way you executed. Like, usually what I'd expect in a story that's tackling something like that is the person who's going against what the ideas of a cultural appropriation is, like, they'd be presented as the villain. And it kind of is that way with China, but Flavia's got kind of a different response to it, which that was the part where I was kind of on my knee, like biting my nails the most, because I'm like, okay, you guys are meant to fall in love, but you're clearly so on this different pages with this. I really just want you guys to come to some kind of understanding, but Flavia, god damn it, you're being so stubborn. And it's just like, honestly, I felt like a bloody fangirl going through it sometimes. And I love that you also showed that it's like people who claim to be good and like could be seen as friends, and even with this being the love interest, having that conflict and not being afraid to show like how different Flavia and Nisha are, despite them both being women of color, that is something that I loved in this book as well. So was that always your intention with Flavia?
To show like the differences
Yeah.
of two women of color. I mean, what I wanted to write were two authentic girls of color who are both, you know, queer, and they both have different cultural contexts. They've had different experiences in life, and that has shaped them into different people. Because Nishat has obviously grown up in like a Bengali family. Both her parents are Bengali. Um, she lived in Bangladesh since she was 10. No, sorry. She lived in Bangladesh until she was 10 years old. But then Flavia, um, she has she has never been to Brazil. She has a white father, and she has to deal with what it means to be biracial and what it means to have to appease her white family, which is something that Nishat can't understand because she's not biracial. And I think like that's what I want to show, that you know women of color are all so different. Obviously, we face similar oppressions, but like each of us have such nuance to our lives, and it's just shaped by how we grew up or who our families are or what our cultures are. And I hope that we see like a lot more books like that with just authentic representation of women of color.
Yeah, definitely, because I completely got the idea that not all, this is kind of what the main thing of the plot was. Nishat's sexuality to me made her feel alone in how her family kind of responded to it. Like she feels she has to struggle with it herself. But the henna being an art form, that felt to me like how art really speaks to you when you feel like no one else understands you and you can express yourself through it. And so I can completely see why Nishat would be mad at like Flavia and China for essentially taking this henna thing and just using it for the aesthetic reasons, whereas Nishat's got a clearly different experience with it, and that can be a difficult conversation to be had. But the fact that it happens in a book that is so freaking charming and cute and still has that kind of level-headed, mature discussion about it, I love when stories can do that. Essentially, that's like the Shrek effect. It's an onion that has a lot of layers, and that's beautiful. You can take that and use that as a quote review if you want.
Thank you. I'll put it at the very like top of the book cover. The Shrek effect, an onion.
Honestly, I don't know what. If people want to come on the show, they should expect me to just ramble and say random funny stuff like that. But yeah, that's also something I imagine like you intended as well, for it to be fun and cute, but also not shy away from like very mature themes like this as well.
Definitely. And it was one of the things that I struggled with, actually. It was one of the more difficult things about writing the book. Um, I wanted the book to have a happy ending, and I wanted the book to be like a rom-com. So I wanted to have those light, funny moments. And even though I know that there is like queer pain in the book, obviously like the very beginning, it's not great, like Nishat coming out to her parents. But the way I wanted to write it was that even when Nishat was facing certain kinds of pain, it was immediately like kind of lightened by the funny moments. So even like when she's coming out and she's making those comments about like having a cheat sheet for coming out, or she's say like her sister is like, is this an April Fool's joke? And she's like, it's August. What I hoped was that yes, you would feel like that kind of gut punch of how Nishat's coming out went and how that devastates her, but that you could also see the light moments in that as well.
And I love that even Nishat's like growth to this art form is also, it's something she's very passionate about, but also you wrote that it kind of sets her apart from her friends as well, because they're in a moment of where she thought like, oh, I'll just do this and then everyone will go with it. That's very real to what I feel teenagers go through, and I hate this idea that, I mean, I've been saying this for ages, that all these characters in like middle grade and YA have to be perfect little angels who never make mistakes and everything, and Nishat does make a few mistakes and has to live with them throughout the story. And particularly one thing I found funny, just before we go on to this, there's a point in this book halfway through where instantly I saw the end of the chapter and I was like, okay, I have to binge read this the rest of the way, because it's when Nishat talks about stealing henna supplies. And I thought, is this gonna turn into like a fucking James Bond film suddenly? Like, I imagine her putting on the masks and like hiding out in the stores and getting the stuff out of there. It didn't go that way, but I thought that idea was very funny. I bet you've never heard that from a book reviewer of your story.
I have not, no. But I mean, Nishat and Preeti do make that. They make a James Bond joke there, right?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I've forgotten, but I think so.
And I did love the relationship between Nishat and Pretty. Like, that's kind of similar to the family thing. Even though there is these rocky elements where they don't quite understand each other, you can tell they really love each other, and like they'll always be there. And that's where the biggest gut punch of the story came. And I can see by the look in your face, you know exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I do.
So, through reading this, when Nisha gets her stuff stolen and like her thing wrecked and everything, and someone outs her, my first thought was, okay, obviously China's up to her old fucking tricks. But as it was going on, I was like thinking, that's too obvious, and I don't feel it's gonna go that way. I don't know if China's gonna somehow be like redeemed or shown in like a good light at the end. Who cares? I don't know. But seeing that it accidentally came from Pretty gossiping with her friend, that was such a huge fucking gut punch to me. And like that's something that I expect in a lot of like teen stories, is like the second act, like big downfall kind of thing. And it needs to happen so Nishat can kind of build herself up and everything. And a lot of people talk about like forced outings in these stories and like how they shouldn't happen because they're harmful. I think that's bullshit. And I love the way that you kind of did it in this one, because your book's not a downer, ultimately. It's a really fun story, but you need these moments to kind of bring it out. It's like, I was talking about this with AJ White a couple months ago when there was this whole thing going on about queer joy versus queer pain. Essentially, you can't have a rainbow without rain. That's my view on the whole thing. And your book handles that well.
I think something like the whole public outing thing is something that I thought about a lot as I was writing the book, because I obviously know about these conversations about public outings are bad, they don't belong in like rom-coms or whatever, they're like queer tragedy. But in my experience, first of all, there aren't many books about queer POC where there is like a forced public outing, or I can't think of any. That's the first thing. And then the second thing is that these kinds of things happen a lot. And they happen in real life, but they also happen in books in ways that are brushed off. And that's exactly why I wanted to write this book the way that I did. So, for example, like I read books where a character will casually say to another character, this person is queer. And that is an outing. It's not a public outing, but that is an outing, and you don't know what the consequences of that are going to be. But a lot of the times in these books, it's brushed off. It's not like given any weight. It's not really talked about, and that makes me uncomfortable. And I do think like that happens. That happens a lot. It happens in real life. And what I wanted to do was give consequence to that, because when Priti was talking about Nishat to her best friend, she obviously didn't think it was going to lead to a public outing. She was just talking to her friend, but that's where it led to. So I want to give weight to that. When we talk about queer people, a lot of the times we do out them without realizing it, and that can have real consequences. And we need to be very aware of when we're talking about queer people and how we're talking about them and who we're talking to about them.
Yeah, and I think it hurts more that it actually came from Pretty and not China. Like, if it came from China, I could imagine it would have gone down like, I don't know, maybe a big fight in the cafeteria or something. Lots of pizza being thrown, all that stuff. But, that's something I would have expected. Whereas what you did is you took that expectation and flipped it on its head, and it actually made it a lot more emotional and a lot more tragic and true to life. And, like, you even bring up queer tragedies. Like, I don't see a reason why a queer author should not be allowed to write elements of a story that are tragic, or hell, even go full-blown tragedy. If fucking Shakespeare can do it, I say, why can't queer people do it? And this idea that because we're queer and we all automatically have to be like big role models, it's something I'm really against now. I want to see stories like this where it's not about you're looking at a book to represent every sort of level of queer representation. I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, oh, this is what this author thinks of it, and what can I learn from that? And then you read something else and you get a different kind of feeling, and you can kind of marinate all of it, and then that helps to form your own view. That's definitely, I feel, more beneficial than pretending that being queer is a universal experience. And we've talked about this before on Twitter and stuff, so I'm glad that your book does that. I know I do a lot of run-on sentences. I'm sorry.
It's okay. You're bringing up good points. I agree with you. I agree with everything you're saying. That's why I have nothing to say.
This is why I have to make tea before every recording, because my voice hurts. Essentially, now, I do want to talk a little bit about our friends as well. You mentioned before that Jess was the gamer. I'm really curious if that was part of your personality into it, because something I do when I write is I try to put elements of my personality into every character. Even the villains. I think writing a villain that comes from like your own fears and insecurities can be really beneficial. That's what I'm doing with Moonflower. Was Jess like a part of your personality? Because I know you're a gamer as well.
I guess subconsciously I was trying to think of like who Jess would be as a person, and because I obviously know like the gaming community, I know about like video games, it just felt very natural to write her like that because I already had that knowledge.
Mm-hmm. And there was even instances of microaggressions with when her friends go off and do their own thing, which, as I'm remembering it, it was something, it was a Korean type thing, wasn't it? I might be wrong on that.
Yeah, it was like it was that Chaewon wanted to sell like kind of like Korean like trinkets, like there's like a lot of really cute like Korean stuff that you can get in like Korean shops. So you can get like clips with like animals on them and stuff, or like with like little fruits on them. So just stuff like that, like little Korean trinkets.
Yeah, and I love that is also addressed there with China. I believe China wasn't really happy with that either. But the parts that like really sort of boiled my blood when I was reading this is like Nishat clearly knows more about Henna than China does, yet China's getting all the fucking attention because she's born into this situation where she has a ton of followers and she has a ton of friends and like is very popular. And that to me is just like a really interesting source of having an antagonist in a story like this, because I imagine this is not the kind of story where you're going to have a big bloody supervillain as your villain. Having it be someone that you would recognize from high school, and I mean after this, I can't talk about it on the podcast, but I knew a girl who was exactly like China when I was in high school, and probably that's why I was more angry when I was reading those parts.
I think we all knew somebody like China when we were in, like for me, secondary school. I think we all have a China.
The thing I do want to write home, I love the ending, really. I mean, part of me was kind of hoping that Nishat was going to win, but in a weird way, she wins in her own way. Whilst her friends, they end up winning the whole business competition and everything. But Nishat essentially gets the love of her life. And the scene where she goes over to Flavia's house and they're just kind of fooling around in onesies and stuff, that was the most adorable thing I read in the story. Like, I love seeing stuff like that, where it's not just like, oh, we're queer teens and we have drama and we have pain, but moments where they're allowed to like let their inner child out and just be like cute friends eventually falling in love. That was so freaking heartwarming. And I can tell you it definitely made my ankle feel a little bit better when I read it.
I'm glad. I really enjoyed writing that scene as well.
Uh-huh. And there's even an interesting conflict there, since Flavia and China are friends. She comes over there and is kind of like, I mean, we say this in Scottish culture, she's kind of the blocker of that situation. I'm not going to say the whole word because I want this to be a family show, but yeah, if you know what I mean, you know what I mean.
Yeah.
That's I do love that you gave Nishat her happy ending, but even if this wasn't a happy ending, I still feel the story would have had its intended purpose, and I still would have enjoyed reading it. So was there ever a version of this where you thought it might not have a happy ending? Because I'm curious about that for books that always start with happy endings.
No, it was always going to have a happy ending. Like, when I started writing the book, I was like, this book is going to have a happy ending. Like, it's going to end with the two of them, like, falling in love. That was, like, my goal.
Yeah, and it was a very good goal, and you definitely nailed it on the end. Essentially, what I took away from this book is that I've written this down like a sort of mini review because I don't use Goodreads because I hate that site interface. But I think it's very funny. It doesn't shy away from a lot of very mature themes, but also it doesn't feel to me like a pure like issues book, as we might describe it. It feels to me the story of this lonely Bengali girl who's trying to find her voice, use her own voice in her art, and letting herself feel her happiness. And ultimately, the way I would describe this book was it's like a warm hug. And it's
Thank you, I'm glad.
it's honestly, that's all I can probably say about it. Is there anything else that you want to bring up that's like, I don't know, interesting facts you had whilst drafting it? Were any characters different? Did you combine any? Was there other characters that got cut? That sort of stuff.
I don't think so. Honestly, like, the book didn't change that much from the beginning to the end. Well, no, it did actually change a lot. In the very first draft of the book, it wasn't the storyline wasn't about Nishat kind of coming out. In the very first draft, it was almost completely focused on the henna competition. So in that version of the book, Nishat had already come out to her parents, and she was already dealing with like their silence, kind of, and it was just like something in the background. And then when I went to revise it, I thought there's something that's really missing in this book, because this storyline just like doesn't seem to be working. And then I had the idea for the first chapter where Nishat comes out to her parents, and I sat down, I wrote it, and I basically rewrote the entire book to make that a major plot line, to make it be like one of the driving forces in the book. I think that's the only major thing that's changed, and everything else has been like, not obviously like I did a lot of revisions, but more or less everything else has been the same.
And I'm glad it was, and I'm glad this book exists. I was thinking so many things throughout it, but probably the weirdest one that I thought was, because I'm always thinking like, what if this was a movie? If this was, and I'm going to get the cover right now, I could imagine that being a movie poster. But, you know, maybe like in a henna type design. Is the logo meant to look sort of like a henna font in a way? Because I figured that a bit.
I don't think so.
I
don't think it's supposed to look like henna, no.
Because I did see that thing on your Twitter where someone, they took the cover off and then just like designed henna patterns all around it.
Yeah.
That was really
that
cool.
Was amazing.
Oh, God. Well, if this ever becomes like a movie or a TV show or anything, I've already reserved a space for the Blu-ray of it. It's something I could see myself rereading like every year, and I'm really glad that I get to talk to you about it, and that I get to know someone who's written a book like this. So more or less what I'm saying is thank you for writing this book.
Well, thank you for reading, and thank you for having me on here twice now, talking about it.
Yes, and that's also a call for people I've had on the show before who we can't talk about your spoilers in your book because it's either not out yet or you're not agented. If anyone's been on the show before and when your book comes out and you want to talk spoilers, just hit me up. It'll definitely happen. We'll have some fun conversations like this one. And I believe... how much can you say about what's next for you? Like, without giving away too much. I don't want to be getting in trouble by any NDAs or anything.
So my next book is out. It's out spring 2021. So
it's pretty soon.
Probably around the same time the Henna Wars came out, but in 2021. And it's another sapphic rom-com. It's about a Bangladeshi Bengali girl who comes out as bisexual to her friends, but they don't believe her, so she has to pretend to fake date this other girl who is Indian Bengali, and she wants to be head girl in her school, but it's a popularity contest, so she can't be head girl. So she agrees to fake date the other person because she is popular. So the two of them have a fake relationship, and well, we know what happens next.
That sounds really fun. I'm definitely going to be adding that to my reading list. But I mean, if there's nothing else that you want to mention up, I guess we can kind of end it there. Is there anything else you want to bring up about the story or anything at all, or have we covered it?
No, I think we've covered everything.
Well, it's been an absolute pleasure getting to talk to you again. Hope you're keeping safe up there in Ireland, enjoying all the almond magnums that your heart can consume, I suppose. Thanks so much for coming back. It was a pleasure talking to you. Guys, seriously, go and pick up this book. It's a pure delight. It's available on iBooks as well, right?
Probably, yeah.
Okay, cool. It's on ebooks, paperback. I got mine from Blackwell's. I was very happy when it arrived. I can't recommend it enough. I've already sent like images to like all my friends back in Dubai to basically demanding them to read this fucking thing. And that's more or less all I can say. This book's incredible, and you've just heard why. If you guys like this book, feel free to share this, comment what you liked about it in the comments below if people still do that kind of thing. Please be civil to each other. I have to say that because it's my channel. And you can follow Adiba. Where can we like find you like on Instagram and Twitter and stuff?
So my website is adibajaigirdar.com. My Twitter is adiba_j, and my Instagram is dibs_j.
All right, there you go. Once again, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you guys for listening. And if you like this video, you can hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye, guys. Okay.